Over to you, Ray, recording in progress.
Thank you, Suzanne. And welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is the second of our 4 webinars in 2025. And today we're taking a deep dive into BS8887, which is, as you can see, is a game-changing code of practice for the remanufacture of lighting. This was the result of a couple of years hard work by many people, many unsung heroes, and it came out just before Christmas. So we're now going to have a look at that and what it means for the sector and what it states and etc. and all that type of thing. Now we've great speakers to discuss that. We have Kevin Stubbs, who is a member of the BSI BS8887 committee. We have Simon Fisher, he's the founder and director of FMark and well known in this parish. And of course we have Nigel Harvey, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Recolight. So Kevin will kick us off. That'll be followed by Simon, and then Nigel, and then we'll open it up to your comments, your questions. So please engage. They're expecting questions. They're expecting your comments. They want it. So please engage, and hopefully you will come away with a deeper understanding than you had just now. So next slide, please, Suzanne. Okay, the usual housekeeping before we start. We're recording today, and eventually this will be posted on the Recolight event homepage, so you can go back and check things and fast forward and rewind and all that type of thing. So you don't have to take so many copious notes today. You'll get the slides automatically tomorrow via MailChimp. Well, actually later this afternoon, actually it says there. So but also do check your spam folder in case you haven't got your slides. Also, please you make a distinction between the chat box and the Q&A box. Myself and the panelists will be looking at the Q&A box for questions, and I'll read them out. We'll answer them together. Use the chat box for the other things, like if you have any technical questions or any admin questions or anything like that. Suzanne will be monitoring that, and I'll be doing monitoring the Q&A box. Now, as I said, today is one of a series of webinars that we hold every year. We had one back in January, life cycle assessments, LCAs, EPDs, all that type of thing, and it's a really useful webinar. You can watch it on replay. You basically go to the Recolight website and just follow the links. And we had Max Robson, who's the Recolight Environmental Metrics and Training Manager, as well as Martin McGranigan of One Click LCA. So I recommend that if you missed it. Coming up on the 17th of March, we're looking at the new waste regs and how they're going to impact all lighting companies and importers in the UK. We've got Aaron Moon from DEFRA. We've got John Redmayne, who's a managing director of the packaging scheme ERP, and Nigel Harvey presenting on that. And then in May, we're looking at designing sustainable luminaires, and luminaires that get good metrics in EPDs and TM66 and TM65 and all that type of thing. Simon Fisher will be speaking again on that. We also have Frank Thomas. He's the compliance manager at ATG Lighting. And we also have Dave Hollingsby, who's a managing director of Stone Lighting, who are something of a pioneer in this area. Now, next month, we have a net zero lighting conference. And this is about how manufacturers can address their own carbon footprint. And we look at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and how you can deal with that. And also, I think is one of the most valuable things we have at this conference is we have 3 companies presenting and showing us really inside how they achieved the gains that they did. We've got Thorn Lighting and Spennymoor, who have made amazing advances with their factory up there in County Durham. We have Beco Appliances, the guys who make tumble dryers and washing machines, and Triton Showers. Two companies that are very, quite similar style assembly to the lighting industry. And I think it's great that, for us to look outside our industry and see what other people are doing. Very valuable, and looking forward to sharing their insights. So places are still available. just go onto the website and again, follow the links. We're also holding a series of special workshops on life cycle assessments and environmental product declarations. The next one is on the 19th of March in London. There are still places available. Again, to secure your place, just follow the website and you can get hands-on, and you can bring along your products and you can take them apart and all of that type of thing. So that's so I recommend that. Also, the Circular Lighting Report. If you're not familiar with this, this is a news platform that I edit. We post 4 or 5 stories every week, video interviews with thought leaders, project stories, component stories, all sorts of things. And if you just go recolight.co.uk/news. And also you can send me your own stories and news at ray.molony@recolight.co.uk. And of course, our big event is the Circular Lighting Live in 2025. We're moving this year to a bigger venue with more space for exhibitors. It's the Minster building in central London. So please save the date for that, put that in your diary, 25th of September 2025. We have big plans for that, exciting plans to expand that and add new features. And so really, really looking forward to that. Right, just to set the scene about what's been happening in the lighting remanufacturing sector. First off is the news that 2 specialist remanufacturing companies have ceased trading since the start of the year. That's Coco Lighting and Silent Design. I hesitate to add that both were for reasons not related to the remanufacturing business model. They were both for very distinct historic reasons. In fact, there's a lot of optimism in the sector. So we have so here we have Future Designs. We're comfortably the UK's biggest lighting remanufacturer. It's predicting that its activities in the sector will double this year. The company is planning that remanufacturing will grow from 11% to revenues to 23% this year, and that's under their Carbon Careful banner. The company has already done 4 million square feet of lighting upgrades, that 370,000 square meters. Trojan Lighting is another fast-growing remanufacturer based in St. Helens. It's expanding into continental Europe now. It's opened a new division based in Arnhem in the Netherlands. Now, Light Projects Evolve is a relatively new player. It's been founded by Brendan Airy and Alice Tetteridge, and they've just set up a specialist remanufacturing division called Light Projects Revolve. You can see what they did there, and that's going to be headed up by the former Silent Design boss John Bowden, who has spoken at many of our events, and they couldn't find a better person, I would suggest, to head for that role. And also the region initiative with Simon Fisher used to be a collaboration with Coco. That is now a standalone business and doing some pioneering projects. I've written about some of them, public in the education sector and the public sector, and some of those are on the Circular Lighting Report. And just a few projects to see remanufacturing in action. This is Brent Cross Shopping Centre in North London. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this building. And here Trojan Lighting have upgraded the lights from fluorescent to LED, and they've added wireless controls in the process. A key element was the remanufacturing of the centre's outdated fluorescent lighting troughs, as you can see. The company designed new gear trays to match the light distribution, and they made 282 custom 1.2 meter troughs. This is Yarm Private School in North Yorkshire, and here they have reconditioned the luminaires in the auditorium rather than replace them. The fluorescent-based fittings were upgraded to LED by Durham-based Artec Lighting. Now, the cost of the project was 97,000, but annual savings will be 105,000, resulting in a payback of 11 months, which is pretty impressive. This is Lloyds Banking Group's building at the Mound in Edinburgh. And here Mighty worked with stone lighting to reuse this distinctive pendant structure rather than replace it. They upgraded the T5s, dichroic and cold cathode to LED. And again, they added wireless mesh controls, reducing energy here by 78%. They also calculated that the carbon saved at 28,000 kilograms of equivalent carbon dioxide, or 49% compared to installing new replacement luminaires. And finally, this is St. Thomas's Hospital in London. Here, Trojan upgraded the luminaires and the wards in situ as the NHS didn't want to close any beds. They swapped out the gear tray, and again, they added MyMesh wireless controls. It's so easy, really, in a way, to add. These nodes are so small nowadays. It's very easy to add those when you're doing a refurb, doing an upgrade. And they helps that the NHS Trust to automate its emergency lighting monitoring and reporting, and also they added lots of occupancy sensors. The engineer at the NHS Trust was telling me they got 65,000 luminaires across 3 sites, and they want to upgrade them all. So that's the sort of scale of the challenge there is out there in remanufacturing. Okay, that just sets the scene. We're now going to dive into 8887, and no finer man to do that is Kevin Stubbs. So Kevin, over to you. Kevin, are you on mute or on your microphone? Just check. Okay, we seem to have a bit of trouble with Kevin. Suzanne, do you want to check Kevin's connection there?
Yeah, he's still logged on, but Kevin. I'm asking Kevin to unmute now, so let's see
Unmute. That's it.
Here we go.
Now?
There you are.
we
You're
can hear
back.
you. We can't see you though.
Good, you're back. Good stuff. Okay, Kevin, I'll switch over to you.
Your video, Kevin.
Thank you, Ray. So I'm going to run through the BS8887 2024 version. It's issued just before Christmas this year, after 4 years hard work.
Kevin, can you just pop on your video as well if you can?
Oh, hang on.
Sorry to be so demanding.
Probably need to be unlocked as well for that. Excuse me, I'm working on 2 devices here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, start video.
There you go.
Good.
There we can see it. Yeah. Okay,
excellent.
Great.
Right. So the TPR 1/7/4 committee has worked for 4 years to produce this code through the British Standard Institute. Remanufacture is now the new name for detailing accurately the process previously known as either modifying, repairing, or maybe retrofitting. So it's been going on for a number of years, but now it's formalized because it's now more important than any time to reuse what we've got. This is a guidance document. So if anyone claims compliance with this British standard, as people didn't say we comply with British standard, then they'll be expected to justify any course of action that deviates from its recommendations. Excuse me. To introduce it, we're here to provide the terminology and the processes required to conduct the work on luminaires. beyond the initial production and installation, apart from that of regular maintenance. The standard clarifies the processes involved and in remanufacturing luminaires, regardless of their original light source technology. Remanufacture can be conducted in situ or in an industrial environment, and luminaires range from being unused through to used luminaires being sold to a second or third party user, maybe in their product life cycle. Remanufactured luminaires might meet their original design intent and specification, or they might be significantly altered in response to changed technology requirements or even for artistic need. A framework for remanufacturing luminaires is provided. It gives confidence to the purchaser and end user of the remanufactured equipment that this will meet the accepted industry norms. It's recognised the scale and depth of work might vary between or depending on the scale of project, so paperwork would be aligned to that. In order to write a standard, we had to define both existing and new definitions. The scenarios we had to cover were everything from where we started thinking about commercial office luminaires being rehandled, put back in service, right through to if someone was to, say, reclaim an existing luminaire that they bought and convert it or obtained and convert it to a table lamp or feature light. So we had to define who's who, what's what, and the processes. Who's who? The donor is defining who the origin organisation which makes the core available for remanufacturing. The recipient is the organisation receiving that core from a donor, and I'll explain core in a couple of slides. So they're receiving a core from a donor with the intention of remanufacturing. End user is the organisation operating the remanufactured luminaire. OEM, original equipment manufacturer, people have probably already heard of this, and that's an organisation that makes new luminaires from existing parts, from parts, actually that's not replacement parts. A contracted remanufacturer, CR, is a remanufacturer operating in direct partnership or agreement with the relevant OEM. The OER, the original equipment remanufacturer, is an OEM that remanufactures its own luminaires, which is quite a rare thing at the moment, but I think that we aim that would become more popular. An independent remanufacturer, IR, is one independently operating from the OEM, so they're doing their own thing. Luminaire, hopefully we all know what that is, but it's the apparatus which distributes, filters, or transforms the light from light sources. That includes all the parts that are necessary to support, fix, and protect the light source or light sources, and the circuit auxiliaries to connect to the supply and make everything work. Core is a new thing introduced. It's the thing we're going to save, like the Apple core carries through an Apple. The core is the component or luminaire retained throughout the remanufacturing process. This could be the housing, the enclosure, the spine, or key components such as an optic. It could be multiples rather than one. Component is the individual element or component or part of the core that's either removed, retained, or added during the process of remanufacturing. Scope of work is the description of work to be accomplished or resources to be supplied. The process, remanufacture, is an industrial process which creates a luminaire from a used and or new luminaires and or components. Design for remanufacturer, also known as DFREM. This is a design methodology whereby an item is designed to facilitate future remanufacturing or repair processes, i.e. we've got to design new product to be repairable and maintainable, and this makes it more sustainable. Component harvesting is the process by which components are removed from the core for remediation, reuse or resale. Secondary processing may be conducted by other organisations because, let's take a driver, might have components that are using for different metals, etc. So the process flow chart would be that we go through an assessment process. We choose if the luminaire is in an as-new condition. If it's not currently Can the luminaire be remanufactured? We move to the right. If it can't, then it goes on through the recycling route where we can component harvest and recycle, and that's what Recolight do all the time. And now we add the process, going back to the left. If the luminaire is in an as-new condition, we could say yes. Does the OEM retain warranty and compliance responsibility? Yes, then we could reuse it. If no, then it could be tested, labelled and reapproved through a process and put back into installation and use. And that continues to end of life, and we hope end of life won't just continue the first time, but it will carry on for future. So this is the process that we have on British Standard documentation. And basically we take the criteria on the left, which is the things we've discussed through this different annexes and so forth, the conformity, the safety, the performance, design, environmental impacts, costs and quality. And we transform that through the process from left of the screen to the right of the screen to give us documentation to support what we've done and why we're doing it. The process from top to bottom is taking incoming luminaires, go through preliminary assessment, scope of works, remanufacture, according to the scope of works, which includes disassembly, cleaning and modification, component harvesting, disposal of obsolete components, and that's proper disposal of obsolete components, selection of new components and reassembly. Then we go through a testing and validation process to complete our system. Then there's a number of annexes, which I'll just skip over. The annexes explain in detail more about what the standard covers and how we should deal with things. Annex A is the categories of core flows into the remanufacturing process. Where do our luminaires come from? Well, they could already be installed, which is what most people have in mind. They could be overstock, where in a wholesaler or in the manufacturer. They could be unopened and unused. They could be perhaps samples that have been used for demonstration or display. They could be returns, incorrect purchase, and open box or part used versions of luminaires. They could be defective, that could be returned back to being effective and compliant. They could be used, which might be sourced from the open market or reclaimed from another project or installation. And they could be purchased with the intent particularly to remanufacture, improve and resell. Annex B covers generic examples of remanufacturing within the lighting industry. So a remanufacturing scenario might include returns, nearly new LED product, on-site and off-site works, sale of stocked remanufactured luminaires, contracted, where someone's contracted to do the work, producer compliance scheme, could be a mobile workshop, or they could be special heritage reasons why we need to do this. Annex C is the flowchart I discussed before. Annex D is a risk assessment, further information. So when we do a risk assessment, we must consider the foreseeable misuse as well as the intended use, particularly for products that are being used that may have been, let's say, an explosion resistant luminaire that is retained for its looks, industrial looks, and is turned into a domestic converted luminaire and sold as a different requirement. It could be the risk assessment is required for the CE or UKCA marking to be able to legally place products on the market. Safety, product safety is defined in BSI 60598, and there's a whole load of other standards which are referred to in BS8887. We must comply with EMC and RED for electromagnetic and radio equipment directive. The ROHS, restriction of hazardous substances, has to be complied with, and it might be difficult to determine what some of those items are in old luminaires. Fire safety, including spread of flame, generation of fire or avoiding generating fire, and emergency lighting requirements. ERP, energy related product regulations, so we might need to upgrade luminaires, and cyber security. Scope of works is in two parts. That's about perhaps where we might change the technical characteristics. So it's a protection class, IP for ingress protection or impact. The optical performance might change, fixing requirements, the installation and weight, because you might use a luminaire for a different purpose or application. The control technology, there's always the opportunity to introduce and upgrade controls for dimming and wireless connectivity through this process. Forms of scope of works could be a tender document, it could be a signed document between organisations, or it could be just an email. And there might also be a scope of works which is purely within the manufacturer or remanufacturer process remit. The idea is it must facilitate clear understanding and consider all the foreseeable eventualities. It includes those items at the bottom: quantities, logistical aspects, times and uncertainties, aesthetic condition, key qualities, poor condition. If it's an unsuitable product, what do we do? Components, whether we reuse or replace, performance, test, responsible organisations. Annex F talks about de-installation of luminaires. It's important to maintain the quality and finish of luminaires to be remanufactured. Subjects to be considered are the general requirements, making the information available, the numbers and types of luminaires, how we do the de-installation process, so we need to explain what we're doing and communicate that to everyone who's involved in handling. Care in package and storage, as well as transport. Design for remanufacture. As we said before, careful design to build in durability, robustness, resilience to enhance sustainability of the product. Should include facilitating maintenance, cleaning, repair and remanufacture for the future. Recognise likely replaceable and upgradable components, keeping as many items common as possible. Ease of manufacture and disassembly, and making sure it's capable of reprogramming, keeping programmed, remediation and recoating of perhaps of some components, refinishing. Lastly, Annex H covers documentation, so a technical file has to be kept in order to place the product on the market or transfer ownership. It's as it would be for a brand new luminaire. It can be for single or multiple luminaires, can be held in multiple places, but collated when required. Can be maintained for 10 years. So it must be maintained for 10 years. Contents should include preliminary assessment, scope, engineering plan, installation, assembly guide, description, operation, specification, markings, changes made, the technology, the performance, the IP, detail and assessment of components that are used and reused, risk assessment, and the record of works carried out. New and original markings or labellings should be covered in that, and particularly we should note that the labelling must be very clear as to who has done the rework and now is put the product back on the market or completed the item, because we may wish to keep the history of the luminaire in terms of some of its certain original markings, so that these must be clearly understood by any user in the future. So it's what is the overriding liabilities. So the next steps is firstly to make sure that you consider the option to reuse, repair or remanufacture on your projects or products. And are you keen to break down the barriers to reuse? If so, Recolight have facilitated an expert group which is brainstormed, and this is proposing government initiatives as well as encouraging and supporting the de-installation, storage, remanufacture and reuse initiatives. The standard we've talked about today is the UK British standard, but there's a lot of interest in it across Europe, and there's international interest as well. So in order to move forward, you need to get onto the British Standard bsigroup.com shop, and you can download your standard and find out more about it. So thank you very much. I'll stop my share now and hand over to Simon.
Superb. Thank you very much, Kevin. Okay. So a very quick overview of a very comprehensive document and I'm sure there'll be questions that we'll happily answer afterwards. But I think you can probably appreciate that it's a reasonably complex process, this art of remanufacturing, and maybe some of you are kind of going, well, why bother get involved in this process? It all sounds like pretty hard work. I think you'd have to have been under a rock for quite a long time to understand that the UK, or to not appreciate that the UK government has made some fairly stern commitments around greenhouse gas emission reductions. Certainly from a UK perspective, the government has stated that by 2050 they want to get down to 1990 levels of carbon emissions. It's a pretty strong statement when you then analyse how we're actually doing against that target. The image on the top left-hand corner is actually the UK's position with regards to greenhouse gas emissions. The pathway to hit target is the dotted line, and you can see there's a fairly big delta between the path we're on, which is a path of reduction, albeit a very gradual decline compared with the rather steep curve that we have to go on to hit those targets. And just as a point of interest, because there may be people from further afield on the call, there are also charts on here from Australia, from the US, and a kind of a collective European perspective that basically shows that it's all rubbish, and we are all, and everyone is missing their targets. So the answer as to why bother is quite clear in the fact that we have to do more to achieve the targets that we've set ourselves, and remanufacturing plays a rather large part in that. In addition to that, we're in a situation where we have legislation that is facilitating bans or the ceasing of production of some more traditional technologies. Before fluorescent, incandescent and tungsten were subjected to bans, and metal halide and so on. But fluorescent is the real biggie, because actually there's still an awful lot of fluorescent embedded within real estate globally, and really is still some low-hanging fruit with regards to remanufacturing and facilitating a remanufacture to LED and more sustainable sources. In addition to that, the World Economic Forum stipulate that by 2050, or 80% of the buildings that exist today were still going to exist in 2050. So really our carbon reduction and our greenhouse gas emission reductions have to come from the existing built environment. And, you know, whilst taking out traditional products and replacing in their entirety with LED gets you a win from an energy perspective, you know, we do have to think about broader topics, and we have to consider not just energy benefit, but embodied carbon reduction. We have to eliminate the waste that you know, and reduce and where possible eliminate the waste process and the amount of products that are hitting the e-waste stream, if you're lucky, of course, because, you know, certainly in the UK, only about 7% of all electronic waste goes through an approved e-waste scheme. So we're kind of even optimistically saying we eliminate waste, it still doesn't mean that it goes through an approved process. So that's a tough part, but we have to reduce our carbon, we have to eliminate waste. And what 8887 is doing is really setting the framework to make sure that remanufacturing is delivered in such a way that it delivers confidence and it delivers product integrity, so that actually products that go out on the market can be viewed and can be seen as just as good, just as reliable, have the same kind of warranty conditions, and breed the confidence in this remanufacturing process. So it would be easy to consider, or it would certainly be a fair statement that up until quite recently, you know, remanufacturing is a fledgling kind of new vertical marketplace within the lighting industry. And up until pretty recently, it could be argued that it was a reasonably cottage industry. But we've seen a real growth in the players that operate in this space. We've seen OEMs develop take back and remanufacture schemes to look after their own products. We've seen independent remanufacturers offer a service to take back multiple OEM products and remanufacture them and place them back onto the market. And what that's done is it's driven a significant kind of interest from end users, from facilities management companies, and from larger organizations. And the next few slides, I just want to introduce to you and sort of take the lid off an initiative that some people on the call may have already been aware of, because there's been some kind of peer review process that's going on. But this is actually the first kind of formal lifting the lid on a piece of work that FMark has been doing with Mighty Lighting and the team at Mighty, who have the facilities management contract for Scottish Government and all the Scottish Government buildings. And I was approached about a year ago to really sort of write a document that helped initially Scottish Government, but as you can see on this slide, we've had contributions from NHS Scotland and from Zero Waste Scotland, who we believe will ultimately manage this document. But it was really kind of a document. I was asked to generate a document that really highlighted what good circular economy lighting looked like. And the original kind of remit and the original brief was to never buy a new light fitting again. That was the original kind of briefing session that we had with the innovation procurement team at Scottish Government. And whilst that's a very admirable objective, and certainly there's a lot of information in this document that goes a long way to help them secure that objective. But the reality is that in a lot of cases, it's just not feasible and not practical to avoid or just to keep products eternally in the loop. That might be mechanical damage, that might be technical reasons why luminaires ultimately have to be replaced. But I can't give you a massive deep dive into this document because it hasn't formally been ratified and formally been released, but I've had permission from the Scottish Government to give a very broad overview. So what this document does is set out some frameworks about understanding individual project needs, how you might go about assessing luminaires on each project. Kevin alluded in his overview of BS8887, this kind of need to survey existing luminaires and the need to agree a scope of works for remanufacture of luminaires. And this document very much outlines how you might go about conducting a survey, how you might go about assessing those luminaires. You'll see in a couple of slides that thankfully there has been some joined up thinking. So the workflows that are in 8887 are very similar workflows that exist in this document. But fundamentally it also defines the potential for remanufacture and, for that matter, for reuse. So we talk a little bit, I mean, reuse kind of sits as its own thing outside of remanufacture, because reuse is where you simply don't materially change an existing luminaire, you just define it as suitable for reuse as its own product, and it gets used in the same location or in a different location. So not only does it define the potential for remanufacturing, it defines the potential for reuse, and when reuse or remanufacture is not possible, it sets out some guidelines for selecting and using new luminaires. And principally that's around selecting luminaires that already contain eco-design principles, so that in future upgrades of buildings or projects, then it'll be much easier to facilitate remanufacture, because those luminaires already contain the ability, for instance, to change light engines and change drivers. So ultimately, the document is there to make sure that there's consistency of implementation, and ultimately there is demonstrable circular outcomes that can feed directly into documentation like CSR, like ESG, that demonstrates pathways to net zero. This also aligns, and we state in the document that aligns to this kind of hierarchy of lighting that the Recolight produced, which endorses this idea that recycling luminaires should be the final destination of a luminaire journey, and where possible find new homes for lights, and where possible remanufacture. So good joined up thinking there. And this isn't just a remanufacturing document. So as I mentioned, we talk about reuse, we talk about remanufacture, and we talk about the specification and delivery of new luminaires. So BS8887 on the right hand side, of course, is a key document. This Scottish Government document is in its final draft now, and thankfully we've been able to move it from talking about this upcoming BS8887 to the newly released 8887. So if we are talking specifically about remanufacture, we're encouraging people to make sure encouraging manufacturers to remanufacture products in line with BS8887. But when we talk about particularly about remanufactured products, then we're also encouraging embodied carbon evaluations via TM65. Any new luminaires that we specify, we ask for TM65 scoring methodologies, but LCAs and EPDs are also accepted. And new luminaires, we ask for a TM66 score. I think, if I recall correctly, the minimum is 2.2. But for remanufacturing, we also ask for an embodied carbon value of the remanufactured element, so that we can make an assessment of what the delta between the carbon handprint effectively and the positive carbon impact of using remanufactured products over simply replacing with new. I mentioned that we had workflows, so it's a very similar chart, just laid out slightly differently and formatted for the Scottish Government document, but it's a more complicated process, the process of remanufacturing, and that's a really important point to get across in today's sessions, is that it requires more time, and it requires site survey to understand and assess what your existing project condition is, what the luminaires are in each of those projects, and to really understand whether there's a potential for reuse, whether the fittings are capable of being remanufactured, and ultimately, if they're not, how we specify and supply new luminaires that are eco-design friendly and suitable for future remanufacture. And of course, it's really encouraging to see that from a new luminaire perspective, that there is, the ability to upgrade and the ability to change light engines and change drivers. These, in line with eco-design principles, these products exist now, and that portfolio of products from multiple OEMs is really growing quite rapidly. So, I think the complexity associated with remanufacture in the next few years is going to be quite high, and it's going to be quite time consuming, and understanding, what is possible and not possible to be done, to be done in terms of remanufacturing is going to be something that is required to be done on a project by project basis. But as new luminaires are specified and as new luminaires are installed, and as we move forward as a lighting industry with an installed base of eco-design products, then remanufacture is just going to become infinitely, less complex moving forwards, because we would have installed luminaires that have this ability to easily swap out, easily maintain, easily retrofit, whilst keeping our carbon footprint low, and capturing all that good stuff with regards to minimizing waste. And on top of the energy, all the good energy efficiency stuff that the transition to LED has afforded us in the last 15 or 20 years. Some additional incentives. The bottom one on this screen, Kevin's already alluded to, that Recolight is really leading a cross-discipline task force to try and work with the likes of DEFRA to understand how there can be how remanufacturing can be incentivized. The obvious one will be around kind of taxation or reductions in corporation tax for remanufactured, or reductions in VAT, or whatever that stuff looks like. But we had a really good session just 2 or 3 weeks ago where DEFRA were involved, and we really just lift the lid on every possibility to incentivize remanufacturing. And actually, as part of the process for producing the Scottish Government document, we had to align with public procurement policies. And what was really highlighted throughout that process was that public procurement policies haven't changed in an awful long time. And so much so that actually in the pre-qualification process for manufacturers, in that procurement policy, there's not really any pointers towards qualification of your sustainability or your environmental credentials as a lighting manufacturer. So there's actually a separate piece of work that's now been undertaken directly with DEFRA to look at how we might at least build in the pre-qualification process the requirement for manufacturers to state very clearly what they do and don't have with regards to ESG statements through their environmental management systems, ISO management systems, and what sustainability metrics they possess or will have in the future. So, there is still a long way to go to make sure that everything is seamlessly joined together. None more so than actually getting the procurement policies that everyone has to align to, just with some environmental metrics contained within them. So to conclude my little slot, I think, my view is, and I hope the growing view is, that remanufacturing is central to the success of, the circular economy within the lighting industry, and making sure that we achieve, significant carbon reductions. We really reduce waste significantly that's hitting that e-waste stream. And that remanufacturing delivers significant carbon benefits on top of energy benefits, and does that waste avoidance piece, and that eco-design itself, and new luminaires that are entering the market will massively simplify remanufacturing in the future. So that concludes my session. That concludes my bit. Thanks for listening. I'll hand you back to Ray.
Well, stay on, Simon. And Nigel, do you want to sort of tell us what your view from the Recolight perspective in terms of the remanufacturing sector?
Thanks very much, Ray, and thank you to Kevin for talking us through the standard and the code of practice. And it's quite clear that code of practice will make give a great deal more confidence to end users and specifiers that remanufacturing has come of age. Move beyond the cottage industry, as Simon put it. And thanks too for Simon for talking us through the drivers for this, the drivers in terms of decarbonisation. We all need to be stripping carbon out of everything we do, but also very interesting to see those comments about what's happening at the Scottish Government. And I suspect that is the tip of the iceberg, and we are going to see an increasing number of public sector and private sector organisations that are seeking to prioritise reuse where it's technically feasible. And so this is a really good opportunity for those in the lighting industry. We're unique in the electrical sector in the UK in that there's a significant number of small and large businesses that are actually manufacturing in the UK. That's not true of many other electrical sectors, but for the lighting sector it certainly is. And so for all of those that are involved in manufacture in the UK, they have the tools, the wherewithal, the knowledge, the expertise, and the facilities to get involved in remanufacture as well. And equally though, for those brands that don't have manufacturing in the UK, there are many organisations that will act as potential subcontractors for them. So this is really a significant opportunity for those who are up for moving forward. Conversely, those who don't may start to struggle. It's never going to become the biggest part of the lighting industry, but it will certainly grow to be a significant subset of lighting manufacture. And just one Recolight initiative I'll mention. I think it was on one of Simon's slides, and that is the Recolight Reuse Hub. And for those products that companies have or control that they're not able to use and they want or are willing to donate to others, the Recolight Reuse Hub gives them the ability to make those available to recipients who might be able to take them and reuse them and or remanufacture them. So Recolight Reuse Hub, which is available on the Recolight website. Thank you, Ray.
Okay, guys, let's take some of the questions that have come in. I'll start specifically with questions specifically about the standard. Colin Pierce, who is Design Plan Lighting, is asking, how do you see this standard being communicated to and adopted by installers that actually fit the replacement GT/parts? I'm guessing GT is group technology.
Gear tray.
Gear tray, yes, gear tray, you're right. So do you want to take that one, Kevin?
Yes, well, firstly, everyone's going to be involved in the process, which is in the BS8887. So really, they should, both the installer and the people who are doing the luminaires should be thinking about that, making sure that everybody understands. So it is a process, whoever takes contractual responsibility. So if there's a project, you're taking luminaires from site to remanufacture and put back into site. So where you'd have installers, then I guess it's either a partnership project with the manufacturer and the installer, or it's the installer heading it up, or it's the manufacturer heading it up, employing an installer. So all of those ways round, they all need to follow the process in the British Standard and be aware of it all.
So it addresses strip out specifically in the standard.
The what, sorry?
It addresses strip out and removal where that's
we talk about de-installation and
de-installation. Sorry.
We explained that also the responsibilities need to be clearly defined in the scope of works, so that everybody knows and understands from beginning to end how we're maintaining the quality of that product. Particularly, it might even involve the finish of the product to make sure that that goes in looking as nice as it came out.
Yeah, it doesn't sort of specify any particular methods or techniques. It just says
that's down to project requirements and your own analysis to come up with the scope for the project.
I think just to chime in on that one, it's the document itself does describe a number of scenarios, like a dozen or so, I think, different kind of potential remanufacturing scenarios, but it's by no means exhaustive. But it really does sort of highlight the fact. And I've always looked, you know, when we're working as the author group to generate the document, then it really did sort of keep coming back to me that fundamentally it's a risk assessment piece of work, right? So remanufacturing is at the heart of it is risk assessment, and the attitude you might take towards remanufacturing, you know, a handful of light fittings that go into an underpass you might have a different attitude to risk associated with that than if you were doing 6,000 luminaires in, or however 65,000 luminaires in St Thomas's, right? So you would have you know, but ultimately it's the independent remanufacturer or the OEM or the OER to look at that and kind of assess the risk associated with that on a project by project basis. And then, you know, there's minimum requirements in terms of placing a luminaire back on the market, which is the same as placing a new luminaire on the market, but additional things are subject to risk associated with the project.
Okay. Wojciech Seplik, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, from Brandt and Partners, asks, is BS8887 standard harmonized with EU regulations? Number one. And how does it handle technological advancements that come along in materials and components? Kevin.
Well, again, the standard isn't yet harmonized, but I think the intention is expected that it will move to harmonization. But there's a lot of interest in it from Europe. I know that Lighting Europe are involved and going through it all and seeing what could be adopted and how they might view things. And I think there's international interest in it as well, because we've started with a process and are ahead of the curve there here in the UK. How does it handle technological advancements? Well, that's down to materials and components. That's down to the people who are doing the work. People who are most up to date with that are going to be the best people to do the work, and hopefully that will come across in the tender process or in the selection of remanufacturers.
Yeah, Simon, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think the document is worded in a way that it's kind of agnostic of technological advancements. It's kind of, you know, the requirements to remanufacture are kind of agnostic of whether you're remanufacturing with, you know, wood pulp or whether you're remanufacturing with metal, right? It's actually the requirements to place a luminaire in whatever format back on the market is pretty consistent.
Okay, Chloe Salvi of Bureau Happold is asking, is remanufacture mainly in, oh, I've lost the question. Is remanufacture mainly intended as refurbishment of a fitting installed in existing projects, or is there a scheme for resale?
Well, to answer that question, it's down, really, the standard is written to cover as many eventualities as we could. And we started off on the thought of the refurbishment of existing fittings installed in an existing project to perhaps reuse in that project. Then we realised it was a much bigger field, and there's a huge number of options. And so the opposite end of the scale might be someone who's taking a luminaire that they found from somewhere, bought online from a reclaim yard or something, and have decided that they want to repurpose it into you know, for aesthetic needs, the different purpose in the home. So the standard covers all of those eventualities, and that's why it's ended up being a slightly longer document than we'd envisaged at first.
So Kevin, when does 8887 kick in? Do you have to actually, if you take a luminaire out of one building and move it into another building, you don't need to comply?
Well, it's a code of practice, so you don't have to comply with it at all.
Okay.
If you state you're complying with it, then you need to follow the code of practice and state where you differ from the process and why, in terms of the risk assessment methodology that's talked about in there. So you need to have a clear understanding of where you stand in the process, what bits apply for your project in the scale of your project, and how you basically make the product safe for somebody to use it and understand how to use it properly and safely.
I'm just wondering, when it's a remanufacturing process and not a reuse, what's the difference?
Well, this standard doesn't cover reuse, because reuse, you're not actually reprocessing anything. You're taking it as it was and completely using it as it in that state. and that opens a whole bunch of extra questions about liabilities, responsibilities, whether things need to be tested, and so forth. And that is another risk assessment that basically needs to be done by the people who are going to be intending to do that process. And hopefully we can all work together to improve the guidance on that. But it tends to be, the reuse process tends to be on a free donation and taking things as they are process at the moment.
It's worth just pointing out, Ray, that remanufacture is the kind of the umbrella term, and sort of underneath that sort of refurbishment, re-engineering, and there's a whole bunch of re's, right, that sit under remanufacture, but that generally fall under this umbrella term of remanufacture. But everything contained in this document is associated with when you take a base product and you create a material change. So whether that's an upgrade from fluorescent to LED, or whether it's even just replacing a driver from constant current to a DALI, or so you're making this material change and then placing it back on the market. That's what 8887 covers. Reuse does pretty much sit in its own little bubble, because we're not making a material change. We're kind of assessing that product and then kind of going, it's okay as it is. If I put that in context to the Scottish Government document that we just alluded to earlier, the workflow for reuse is quite straightforward. It's kind of like, is it already LED? Yes, no. Is it in good condition? Yes, no. And is it, if I recall correctly, is it 100 lumens per watt and above? Yes, no. And if all of those are yes, then actually you can make the decision to reuse that somewhere else because it's good enough, but if any of those become a no, then you automatically have to kind of default to another position. And just while I'm on that, we talked a little bit about the fact this need for survey, and this is a new kind of level, kind of pre-tender surveying and understanding what's in a project. If in the document we stipulate that actually if you can't do a survey for whatever reason, whether it's project timings or accessibility or whatever, you can't survey the project, then actually the default position should be replaced with new, but with eco-design credentials, because you don't want to guess at whether a product is able to be remanufactured. You'll just end up in an absolute mess. So anyway, yes.
Interesting. Okay, I got one more question, and then I'll let it go. But if your Resus luminaire project that you have you got a picture? Yeah, hold it up. Oh, you got it there beside you.
No, it's a water bottle.
I thought you were going to magically produce it.
I'm not that good.
And give us the elevator pitch on it. But but if you pop that in, if you take the lamp out and pop that in, is that remanufacturing?
Yeah, definitely, because you're creating material change. You're upgrading from fluorescent to LED.
Yeah. For
those on the call that don't know, this is just it's a LED module that retrofits mechanically into fluorescent lamps, lamp pins, but the driver and the emergency is always remote, so it's control agnostic and emergency agnostic and all that stuff. I'm end of pitch. But because we're changing from fluorescent to LED fundamentally, but we're changing the drive circuit, we may be changing the emergency, then that's a remanufacturing process, and it's subject to everything that sits within BS8887 in terms of compliance and scope of works, agreeing scope of works with a client, so on and so forth. But
not a lead tube. If you put a lead tube,
definitely not a lead tube.
Okay. Right. Right. Andrew Nixon of Martech is asking, as ROSE or HS is part of CE/DOC, how can one be issued for a remanufactured product with a core of undocumented construction?
Good question. I take that, and I think the thing is that it's hazardous substances. That's part of, again, the risk assessment of what you've already got. In the same way as if you do a fire risk assessment of a project, say for emergency lighting or fire reasons, you have to say, well, these bits are in our control, and for this project, that bit can't be done. If you're not able to to comply, that risk needs to be transmitted back to the user and discussed as a methodology agreement, as in a safe method of working on that project and a safe understanding. But in most cases, you would be eliminating the ROHS components by identifying them through known components and hopefully through known statements from the original documentation, should that be available. But yes, that is a contentious issue. We did have a lot of discussions about that point, but that is down to this risk assessment of what you do in your process, what you agree as your scope of works, and highlighting any issues across all parties.
So it's acceptable to stand over a luminaire even though you don't know every last detail about what's in there, correct?
Yeah, you might not know everything. You know, in the old days, it might be capacitors, and in most cases they'll be changed out. But there's all sorts of other materials that might be there. And obviously, if someone made a statement for a product that's been in use for 12 years, then their statement of ROHS compliant from 12 years ago would be different to one of a product that would need to be put on the market today. So that's obviously where Andrew's question comes from, and that's an element of risk, and that element of risk can be mitigated, but it might be at more cost.
There was a lot of debate about things like POPs, persistent organic pollutants in things like diffuser materials or housings, and particularly if you can't, you know, accurately identify what that material is, the chances are, if it exists now and continues to exist, and you don't sort of break into or break open that material, the chances are, if there's anything that's in there that's not groovy, will stay in there. Yeah, I think, you know, you may take a risk. It sort of goes back to this kind of what the scope of the project is. You would take a view on that. If there were 6,000 luminaires in St Thomas's, or however many, then actually you would probably do your investigative work and make sure that it's a non-polluting, or, you know, or it is still a compliant material over something that, you know, and if there's a risk, you may take the view to just change it out of hand.
Yeah, but what we have to consider is, Ray, that quite often those luminaires, if they weren't to be remanufactured, or so no one was looking at them, they were just remaining in use, then they might still be happily in use for a number of more years without any intervention. So what you're doing might not be better or worse than what leaving in situ was. Yeah,
correct. I mean, it's a balance between common sense and, you know, strict adherence to, you know, letter of the law. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah, I mean, as a declaration of compliance to get your CE marking or UKCA marking, then you're declaring what's compliant, and you'd have to declare that you're unable to confirm about these items particularly, and that would be part of your declaration of compliance.
So as long as you declare it, that's okay, kind of thing.
Well, you've got to declare it to your client, and people have got to decide on the risks accordingly. Yes.
Yeah, but you're not in breach of any legislation or anything by saying, I'm putting this luminaire in the market. I don't know fully what's in there, but I'm saying I've done a good check on it.
I couldn't 100% confirm that or deny that at that point, I don't think. But I would think you'd struggle to find whether it's worse than keeping it in use at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Rick Walenswinkle of ELM, technology consultant, is asking how to control the use or absence of gluing parts around lead engines. Adhesives, Kevin, does that come up?
It's not covered in there, but we all know that that's not designed for remanufacture. That's designed for cheapness and simplicity. And somebody buying luminaires in the first place, if they buy things that are glued together, then they're going to go straight down the race to hierarchy triangle that Simon showed, straight to the bottom and to downward recycling or disposal, rather than allowing the recycling and remanufacturing that we're all here talking about today.
We don't like adhesives.
No,
Well,
and if,
it was what it was, right? So I'm glad that eco design exists. I'm glad that new luminaires are being engineered and designed and engineered to facilitate light engine replacement and driver replacement and where possible eliminating, unless it's a technical reason for doing so, eliminating adhesives and non-similar parts being glued together. It's part of what we have to deal with now, and I sort of alluded a little bit earlier to the fact that remanufacturing will be hard work for a while, because we're working through whatever we touch. It inevitably is working through luminaires that were developed and manufactured with a different mindset some time ago.
yeah,
Fluorescents are easier, but anyway.
It's interesting actually, Simon, when you think back, I would actually say that going back to very old and historical luminaires, they were automatically designed to be taken apart and repaired and carefully put together and so forth. And then we've moved to the sort of throwaway age of the last 15 or 20 years that people have let these things creep in, and we're going back now to good practice, which seemed to be the obvious thing to do years ago.
It's fluorescents were made to be replaced, right? So because fluorescents lasted a lot less than the luminaire generally that they went into. So actually it's, there's still an awful lot of fluorescent that exists in real estate, whether it's offices or healthcare or education or university campuses or whatever. So there's an awful lot of fluorescent that still exists, and they by default the lamps were replaceable. So there's potential and really good opportunity, and I would argue that's where the lowest hanging fruit still sits for growth in remanufacture.
Isabel Filipova is asking, have you defined which possible core components have the highest impact on the environment and therefore should be prioritized as core components?
I think by default, again, it's those lamps. There's these older lamps that are now kind of the manufacturer is being phased out. So we're facing an end game now. Okay, fluorescent will be around for some time, right? And you'll be able to buy fluorescent to replace that, for some time to come. But at some point in the future, it will either become prohibitively expensive to buy because there's so few and far between. But you factor in that there's some really nasty stuff in fluorescent. The doses of mercury to make fluorescent actually strike. So it's kind of in everyone's best interest to make that transition from fluorescent to LED sources, sooner rather than later, and that's where the opportunity lies, I think.
What about drivers, Dallas?
Well, we need to take 230 volts and make them a drive current, whether that's regardless of the technology. So it's a topic for another conversation, another webinar somewhere down the line. But right. There are elements of drivers that tend to be the failure mode in drivers, and it would be lovely if those elements were interchangeable or replaceable as well. Capacitors, Kevin alluded to earlier, but that's
down the road.
We won't go into that today.
No, we won't go into that today. Cormac O'Prey is asking, a commonly accepted definition for remanufacture is to offer products that are at least as good as new back onto the market. Is this consistent with the working definition that you use?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's yes, combined with a risk assessment. So, again, if somebody's doing a project within a restricted budget or time frame, then you're not going to be able to do as good and efficient a job as you might be if you had an open budget. The same with buying new luminaires. You might not get the best. So yes, it should be able to be at least as good as a new product on the market. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point and it was one that was debated quite a lot in the production of the document, because it's feasible that you could take a product, remanufacture it, and actually remanufacture it for a different use to the one that it was used in the first place. So it could come out of an office space and go into a different environment. And actually, the requirements of the new space would be lower or less than where the product was taken from. So technically, you could place a product back on the market that was inferior quality to the one that came out, or in inferior performance, but that's because it's meeting the needs of the new project that it's going into. Not, but if you take it as a like for like upgrade, then absolutely. I've not worked on a project where we haven't delivered, whether it's energy efficiency, or in most cases the light level is maintained and the energy benefit is taken. I've worked on a couple of projects where the customer wanted it to be brighter, and therefore, the energy benefit was diminished slightly, but we gave them better light that lasted longer, and so on and so forth.
Kevin Shaw is asking, how do you minimize the compliance burden for small quantities of luminaires and those of specific historical or architectural interest? For example, mid-20th century fluorescent fittings designed specifically for a building.
Yeah, I think that's that is covered in the standard. It is down to the risk assessment, and the risk assessment, the standard allows for people to make an appropriate judgment on their project. So if it's a small and historic project, then you run through a brief risk assessment process, look at the luminaires, see what's practical to do some perhaps on-site trials. The main thing is to make sure that your thermals and performance is met, and that it's fire safe, and then you can move forward to coming up with a solution. And there's no reason why that couldn't be certified. But it depends on who you partner with as their capability to be able to do that work. If it's the on-site caretaker, then they might not have the same capability as a remanufacturer.
If you did a dozen luminaires,
sorry, right? It's a really good point that Kevin makes, that there's a certain amount of fixed cost, right? To ensure that any product that's remanufactured is suitable for placement back onto the market, whether it's an EMC test or or a photometric test, or some thermal due diligence, or whatever that is agreed to. That's a set of cost that would have to be split over 5 luminaires on a project, or it could be split over 6,000 luminaires on a project. So it's an absolute valid point that the cost metrics may not work in some scenarios, purely because of that kind of that bit of kind of fundamental due diligence that you have to do to make sure that it's correct replacement of a product onto the marketplace.
Yeah, there may be a minimum number of luminaires that it actually just makes sense to remanufacture because of that overhead. So it might be 100 to 200, for example, and below that it becomes harder to go through the processes to ensure confidence in the conformity.
But say if it's, let's say, an architectural luminaire that's been designed for a particular project, like I've been involved in some uplights outside a luminaire. I know Simon's been involved in some torch lights outside a building, and things involved in the treasury, where they had luminaires they wanted to keep that were listed back from the millennium. Then it is possible to do that. So I think we need to think of ways to do it and conform rather than ways around it.
Well, you still need to do a technical file, even if you just done half a dozen luminaires. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you might not have all the information, but what you're doing is still going to be a lot better than someone sticking a retrofit, let's say a retrofit light bulb conversion into the socket that might be equally unsuitable and might ruin all of the emergency lighting characteristics of the building, etc., without people knowing. So it's down to engaging the right people to identify and following the thorough process. Yeah.
Interesting question from Martin Zabo. There are some circumstances where a luminaire cannot be removed to be remanufactured off-site. In these situations, the old gear tray is normally swapped out for an LED gear tray. This is normally carried out by the FM team on site. Has the FM team on site remanufactured the luminaire? Do they become legally responsible for the luminaire? And would they be responsible for the testing and certification to comply with CE marking and BSI IEC 60598.2.2021 plus A11 Annex Q?
I would say
Be precise.
I would say yes, they are responsible,
Yes.
because they're equally responsible and liable because they might not have employed the right people to do the work if it's not their skill. So they're an FM company. They're capable of maintaining, but if it needs to be remanufactured, then they need to engage people who are competent in remanufacturing to do the process properly.
You'd agree with that, Simon? Yeah.
Yeah, completely. I mean, this isn't necessarily a new challenge, right? So we've lived in an age where lead tubes, as you talked about earlier, has been a direct retrofit. There's been all kinds of what they colloquially corncob style, LED retrofit for metal halide and stuff, and that does constitute a material change, which, in theory at least, technically, should require those products to be recertified. So, yeah.
Okay, a couple of comments next. First from Colin Pierce. My current experience is that many of the maintenance electricians doing the work to upgrade fluorescent luminaires have no idea that they need to follow this process. When modifying an existing luminaire, they often do the work and move on without testing and producing the required documentation.
Yeah.
Sarah Kelly says, not a question. This is Sarah Kelly, who is the BSI committee manager for TPR 1/7/4. She says, just say huge words, thanks to the committee members present today and all of the committee for their excellent work, dedicated time, and the commitment to developing this brand new standard. Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to working with you again on all future updates and developments. So that's a thanks to you too, I believe. And we've got a question from Phil Muir, who's saying, who should be making the risk assessment? Kevin?
Who should be making the risk assessment would be the people who are contracted to take on the work. But obviously the first step is the scope of work, deciding who's going to be employed or how it's going to be tendered or who you're going to partner with. So that scope might have to be done with a partner, or it might be in the future that there'll be some consultants or people who would independently assess that element if it needs to be tendered. So it's a very difficult thing to look at how you would tender to do the project properly, and how apples would be compared with apples on that process.
If I look at the Scottish Government document, it's not clearly not issued for release yet, but the intention is that when it does, then there'll be a series of events or webinars or whatever that kind of where people like FM, that are contracted to manage, the lighting health in any given building, can just kind of understand what these kind of new processes entail. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be good fun in the first instance, when people just understanding that it's going to take a little bit longer. There's some assessment required. The transition to, really for this to become something that is become second nature is going to take some time to do, because it's going to take some more time, more effort, and more energy to engage in remanufacturing than it would be just to buy a panel from a wholesaler and shove it in the ceiling.
Cormac O'Prey again is saying, retaining existing fittings will impact your sales revenue and profitability unless you move to a product as a service model. How do you justify this to the business and convince them that it's in their interest? So I think that's a kind of a manufacturer perspective.
Well, I think, as Simon alluded and Nigel said, really, can you afford not to be involved in making your business capable of doing remanufacture? Products as a service might make life easier, but how you justify it to businesses is down to you. Some businesses are saying that they're not ready to take it on, and it's quite a complicated process and responsibility. and quite a cost-heavy process to be taken on by a big company, and that's probably why a lot of the people started up have been smallish companies. But I think we've gone beyond the cottage industry. Simon mentioned at first, and some companies are making a good job of doing it properly.
Yeah,
Well,
Simon,
one of the topics we debated at the round table that Recolight facilitated with regards to incentivizing remanufacture. One of the topics from I forget the gentleman's name, but he was outside the lighting industry. He did a kind of a reuse hub for furniture, and he was like, well, can't it just be mandated? Why is it not mandated that there's a take back scheme? You know, and again, that's a debate for another webinar, I guess. But you know, I think to ground ourselves, you know, Europe is whatever 15 billion euros of luminaire sales a year, or lighting sales a year. I guess the UK is 600-700 million sterling. You know, remanufacturing is probably an nth of 1% of that total available market at the moment, and I think we'd probably be patting ourselves on the back if it became a few percent of total available market. So I don't think this is you know, we're spelling the death of manufacturing original equipment anytime soon. So hopefully that will allay your fears.
The question was really about margins, Simon. Would you say the margins are there or improving in them on remanufacturing compared to selling new products? I
have the design and engineering capability, or I'm sort of contracted to the Regen Initiative to look at design and engineering, and I have some visibility on the projects that we're collaborating on, and I think the margins are pretty good, are comparable with new products entering the marketplace.
Another question that comes up regularly is, you know, if you have a remanufacturing product, do you get any? Is that reflected in the sort of environmental metrics such as EPDs, TM65.2, etc.? You know, do you get a benefit in terms of, you know?
No, not in particularly. No, it's, you know, you can. I think TM65.2 is if you have to calculate embodied carbon on a remanufactured product, I would argue that it's hard to do anything other than TM65.2, because there generally has to be conducted in quite a quick process, and it's project driven opportunities, and you can't go through a lengthy LCA or EPD process. So you probably have to accept the fact that, you know, I think we've talked at length about the downfalls of TM65.2 in terms of its kind of use of assumptions and its kind of maybe its lack of complete accuracy. But it does give you a fairly accurate steer on. It will be able to give you a steer on what the embodied carbon benefits will be of remanufacturing over replacing with new.
You would think there would be a big benefit if a luminaire was otherwise going to go into landfill and you're reusing it. You would imagine that, you know,
it can be quite sizable. Certainly the projects I've been working on with the Regen Initiative is it's been anything between 50 and 80% carbon handprint, and a fairly equivalent number with regards to waste mitigation. You know, if you can keep, you got a 10 kilogram light fitting and you're only replacing half a kilo of LED and driver, then actually you're keeping 9.5 kilos in situ and in use for the future.
But you don't have to mention you don't have to calculate the embedded carbon in that, in the original elements, the housing.
No, when it's done with the Regen guys, then the assumption we make, basically I do the calculation on the existing product, and say the assumption, of course, is you're going to replace with a like for like quality product. You know, good luck if you could take out a 200 pounds of total product from 15 years ago and put in a 15 pound light LED panel, then good luck, right? That's not a remanufacturing project, and we'd walk away from that opportunity. But if you're looking to replace for like, then actually the assumption you make, rightly or wrongly, we make, is calculate the embodied carbon using TM65.2 of the original product, what the remanufactured element is, and then the delta between the two is the carbon handprint.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. You do get a benefit, etc.
It's not perfect, but it gives an indication of what the benefit will be.
Okay, all right. Right, we've come to 12:30, so I think we'll wrap up there. We've dealt with all the questions, etc. Our next webinar is on later this month, on Thursday, the 27th of March. That's on waste regs, the new waste regs, your responsibilities, etc. So I recommend that. To register for that, just go to the recolight.co.uk website, follow the links, and you can register there for free. You'll get the link to the video for this later on. You'll also get the slides, so keep an eye out for those in your emails. It only reminds for me to thank all of you for your comments and your questions, etc., and to thank our three speakers today, Simon, Nigel, and Kevin. Thank you.
And thank you, Ray, for chairing